Well, we are nearing the end of Lent, which for some of you means nearing the end of me meddling in your life with this terrible series that we're calling Soul Cleanse. We're looking at toxins that build up in our spiritual lives, build up in our lives day to day that actually have a toxic effect on our spiritual lives, on our relationship with God. And so our theme verse for this series is 2 Corinthians 7:1. Therefore, since we have these promises like God being our Father, promises like his love for us and his promise to provide, since we have all the promises God gave us, dear friends, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit, perfecting holiness out of reverence for God. So one of the ways that we say thanks to God for all that he's done for us is by taking a look inside and saying, how can I bring my life more in line with what he wants? Now, we'll never reach perfection. We'll never attain everything that he wants for us all the time. But we can make progress. We can look and we can say, all right, here's some things that I don't think belong there. And you know what? It doesn't actually say let God purify us. It actually says that we're to purify ourselves. Now, there's lots of other scriptures that talk about God purifying us, but sometimes we overemphasize the fact that, well, it's God that changes my life, and underemphasize the fact that actually we have quite a role to play in it. And so if some of this has seemed a little bit like I've been meddling, it's because, hey, we have work to do on ourselves. We always do. So I've talked about entitlement, which is the idea that life or God owes us a certain standard. That sometimes we can slip into thinking that, and that prevents us from receiving all of life as a gift. We've talked about doubt, not doubt in general, because I think doubt is a normal and healthy part of our faith journey, but the little pet doubts that we keep around to keep us from being obedient or keep us from actually trusting in God. And last week we talked about apathy, as I've already mentioned. So this week I'm going to meddle again. But before we get into it, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to take note of the first thing that pops into your mind when I ask it. So the question is this: how have things been for you lately? All right, how many of you, the first word that popped into your head was the word busy? Anyone? Wow, that's not very many of you. You guys must be really spiritual. You can leave. Have you ever noticed how many times when we talk how have things been lately, how many times the answer to that question is busy? Am I the only one who thinks this? Am I off on this? Or is this a pretty common thing in our society? Like, how are you? Oh, busy. We just accept it, right. And actually, in some ways, we almost wear it like a badge of honor. Like, oh, you should feel sorry for me. I've been so busy. Or, just like everyone else, I have bought into the busyness thing. I am busy, which maybe means I'm important because I've got a lot of stuff to do. I don't know. I don't know why we always say we're busy. Maybe it's because we actually are. But I think we kind of wear it as a badge of honor, or at least we accept the fact that that's how everybody is all the time. When I think that maybe we should start thinking of busyness as something that we should be a little bit ashamed of. Now, I'm not here to teach you to be ashamed of anything. I don't really mean it that way. I just mean maybe busy shouldn't be as acceptable as we make it. Maybe busy is actually something bad. In fact, what I would say, and you can decide for yourself if this is true for you, that nothing poisons your spiritual life more certainly than prolonged busyness. Okay, so nothing sort of makes you feel disconnected from God, off track on your journey of following Jesus, more certainly, more consistently than consistent, prolonged busyness. Now, we're all busy for seasons, right? So you don't get rid of busyness altogether. If you're never busy at all, you're probably either retired, although almost every retired person I know is busier in their retirement than they were when they were working. You're either retired or maybe you're lazy if you're never busy at all. I'm not going to judge or anything. But the point is, busyness is a part of life. And so I'm not here to tell you never be busy. But I want to examine how busyness, when we just accept it as the normal status of life, actually is poisonous to our souls. That we are actually created not as human doings that are just here to get stuff done, but that we're created as human beings, and that there's value to us even when we're not accomplishing something, even when we're not busy. And so, to begin with, I want to brainstorm, and I want to talk about what brings us true joy. Maybe you don't know what I'm talking about, but I have these moments sometimes when I'm actually present in the moment and I feel this sense of peace and joy wash over me. And I'm like, this is good. This is the way life was meant to feel. I'll give you an example. This past week, we had the chance to go down to an art gallery, the McMichael Canadian Collection down there. And I love the Group of Seven. I've always loved their artwork, and I especially love Tom Thompson. There's a ton of his paintings in there. And so I just walked around that gallery, and I stood in front of paintings. And paintings are very emotional for me. They're very, I just love looking at beautiful paintings. Not all paintings, actually, but the ones that I like, I really like. And I had some moments of just pure joy where all was right with the world. So that's my idea. What else? What else do you guys have where you sense that moment of pure joy? Nature. What was the other one? Photography.
Home with my family.
Home with your family? Is that what you said? What else?
When the things that you know you need in your life come about.
So,
Almost like an answer to your needs.
okay, when you sense like God's providence, or is that right? Okay. Okay, and what was the other one? Gratitude and laughing children. Anything else? Electric guitar. I am with you, as my family would attest. They may not feel peace while I'm enjoying electric guitar, but I do. Birds. Consider the birds. Curling. I'm going to add golfing to that. Fireplaces, indoor or outdoor. Crochet? Sleeping. Absolutely. Can I add an in to that? There is something amazing about not having to get up at a certain time. So, coffee. Yes. Puppies. And dogs. Yeah, that's true. Dog spelled backwards is God. Puppies spelled backward is Siapup. A little glimpse inside my brain there for you. What else? Adventure.
Singing.
I'm going to put a travel in there. Singing. Thunderstorms. Hugs. One more. Fishing. Which sometimes leads to swimming if it's a big enough fish. All right. So, how many of the things on that list are you able to really engage in, really soak in when you're busy? Like, I'm looking at the list, and lots of it is true for me, too. When I'm busy, but I'm home with my family, my mind is often elsewhere. When I'm busy, I'm drinking coffee to keep me going, not to enjoy the coffee. When I'm busy, I sleep in, but I feel guilty. When I'm busy, I don't take time to notice or do a lot of these things. And so the reason that I wanted to look at that is I want to put in context for you that when we're busy, it's because we have said yes to too many things, generally. It's not always because of that. But because we've said yes to too many things, and that often in saying yes to all these probably decent things that we're saying yes to, we're often saying no to some of the things that bring us the most profound joy. And so I think it's important for us to frame busyness in that way, to understand that the things that make us busy are almost always good things, all right? When we say we're busy, it's not generally like, oh, so what's made you busy lately? Oh, it's all bad stuff that I hate, right? If it is for you, I'm sorry. Like, I go to the MTO every day and just wait around there. Or, like, I just like going to the dentist so much that it's filled my schedule. Like, most of the time, it's not stuff that we hate or dread. It's stuff that's pretty good. It's stuff that is easy to say yes to, but it builds and builds and builds to fill up our schedules, and so that we're actually saying no to a lot of the stuff that is most meaningful and most joyful about life. And so when I talk about busyness being toxic to our souls, I'm not just talking about our relationship with God, like busyness crowds out prayer. In fact, in the Hebrew, in the Jewish culture that Christianity was founded on, there was no separation between the spiritual and the everyday. Everything was spiritual. All of life was spiritual. And so when I talk about busyness being toxic to our spiritual lives or our souls, I'm not just talking about, oh, we don't have time to pray anymore. I mean, we don't have time to engage in our lives the way that God designed us to. Now, again, there are times when we need to get busy. That was last week for me. I was busy this week as I was writing this sermon. Same with how last week I didn't care about writing the apathy sermon. So it's ironic, but it's true. It happens sometimes. But if we do that in a prolonged and long-term way, we end up missing the best life because we're choosing the good life, if that makes sense. Now, there's a well-known story in the New Testament of a busy woman who chose what was less good when the opportunity was there for her to choose what was best. So let's read from Luke 10. Luke 10:38, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted. The Greek there means pulled away by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. Now, all the type A Marthas in the room right now are going, yeah, but without Martha, they wouldn't have had supper. They would have all starved. That might be true. Or they might have ordered takeout. You don't know. Jesus might have done a food miracle. He had done those before. What we know, it's not how all the work would have got done if she wasn't in there, but what we know is that Jesus Christ, the Word became flesh, the creator of the universe packaged into a human body, was sitting in her living room, and she was in the kitchen. She had an opportunity to choose what was best, to notice what was happening right there in her own house. And instead, she chose the good, which was cooking probably the best meal Jesus was ever going to eat. Now, here's the deal. A lot of times this passage is all about, spending time literally with Jesus in prayer. But like I say, and yes, it is, by the way. I think absolutely that's a meaning of this. But I think it's also about paying attention to what's happening, receiving the gift of the present moment that often passes us by if we're so busy and wrapped up in all the things we have to do. See, the question is not for us whether or not, or what we would do if Jesus was in our living room, right? Sometimes we look at this and go, well, if Jesus was in my living room, then of course I would be there paying attention to him. Like, that would be pretty amazing. That would be like saying, I've always been a fan of the band U2. And last night, I had a dream that I met Bono and the Edge in Algonquin Park. Why wouldn't you? But if Bono came over for dinner, I would not spend all the time in the kitchen while he was in the living room. I would notice the fact that he was in my house, and I would try to spend as much time as possible with him. Well, Jesus is someone, believe it or not, even more important than Bono. And Martha was busy. She was distracted. She was pulled away by all the preparations. Busyness keeps us from noticing the fact that Jesus is always in our living rooms. Okay? You don't have to wonder, what if Jesus were in my living room? Now, don't worry, don't go home and look for him. I don't mean he's physically there, but what I mean is that wherever we go and whatever we do, God, Jesus, is present in that. And if we open our eyes and if we pay attention, sometimes we can catch glimpses. But when we're busy, when we're being pulled away by all the preparations that have to be made, we lose sight of the gift that every moment is, the gift that God has given us of our very lives. See, it's possible to live your whole life without ever living your life. Does that make sense? Busyness is the enemy of receiving life as a gift in the same way that entitlement is. Now, it's interesting. Jesus talks to Martha, and she says, "You're worried and upset about," let's draw this out. So I thought this was kind of interesting. You're worried and upset about many things. So those many things for Martha at the moment were cooking dinner. There were all these things. And hey, maybe she was trying to be too complex. Maybe she could have just cooked spaghetti or microwaved leftovers or something. Maybe it wasn't that she was cooking. Maybe it was that she was trying to be too elaborate, trying to put on too much when that wasn't what it was called for. He says, you're worried about many things. And then he says, but really, there's only a few things that are important. And then he says, actually, when you really come down to it, only one thing is important. I wonder if we look at our lives the same way. That often we're pulled in many directions. We're worried about many things. And what Jesus would say is, hey, when I look at your life, there's really only a few things that I think are really all that important. And if you really want to get technical, if you really want to come down to it, one thing, connecting with me, is really the most important thing over everything else. And the other interesting thing that Jesus said was, Mary's chosen what's better, and it's not going to be taken away from her. How often do we invest ourselves in the many things that are things that don't last, instead of the few things, the things we listed on the other paper, that give us joy, that help us really be in the moment and be present? Now, let's talk about, again, let's do another brainstorming session. What are the things that fill our lives with busyness? What kind of things? So, social events is one. What else? Work. Unfortunately. Chores. Puppies. Oh. Or CPUP. What else? Social media. Child rearing. That's a good word. Commuting? Commuting. What else? Coaching. Or I'll put kids' sports, because even if you're not the coach, you still have to be there about half the amount of time the coach does, which is a ridiculous amount of time. What else? What other kind of things? Electric guitars, school activities. I'm going to call that church volunteering to play electric guitar or drums. Yeah. Visiting. If you can't think of things, think Christmas time. Christmas time is usually the busiest time of year, right? What fills your life then? Shopping.
Dishes, laundry.
Yes. Household stuff and renovations. That would be my last week. Okay. Anyway, you get the point. These things fill up our lives. we sometimes have a choice, and sometimes we don't. But often we're saying yes to these things. We're choosing them, okay? So, child rearing, once you kind of choose it, you're kind of stuck with it. Work is a necessity for most people. So that's not one that we can say no to usually, although I would say work is often a necessity, and sometimes, unfortunately, in our society, we've moved to a system where you kind of have to have two incomes in a house to really make it work, and so then that becomes lots of work. Sometimes people working two jobs or both spouses working, and so work has become a much greater source of busyness over the years than it used to be. So you can't really say no to that. But how about social events? We often, I think, say yes to too many social events. What do you think is going on when we say yes to social events that we shouldn't? Guilt? Oh, what would they think if I'm not there? What else? People pleasing. Got to make them happy. They invited me. How about fear? Fear of missing out. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of not meeting social norms. What about kids' activities? We've got sports on there, school activities. Often the reason we put our kids into so much stuff and then make them busy and make us busy is because we're afraid of, well, if I don't put them into this thing, then they're probably going to end up doing drugs, and then they're going to go to jail, and so I better sign them up for this, right? I mean, sometimes as parents, we actually have this weird thinking that it's important to make sure our kids fit in to everything else in society, or somehow we're disserving them. Is it possible that we could actually serve them better by putting them into less things? And I ask that of myself as well. Sometimes, how about volunteering? Volunteering can become a real source of busyness for many of us. And a lot of times, the reason we volunteer is sometimes altruistic, obviously, but sometimes it's this sense that if we don't do it, no one will, and the world will fall apart, and so everything's on our shoulders. So that's sometimes known as being controlling, but I wouldn't say that because I've never been controlling before. My point is that often we say yes to things because of fears or needs or things that are happening under the surface we're not even paying attention to. And we say yes to too much, and it ends up crowding out everything else. Now, why is this such a bad thing? Why is busyness toxic? Well, like I say, it distracts us from the joy of living and the gifts that come to us in every moment. It distracts us from our relationship with God. I think often times of prayer, times of spiritual practices are the first thing to go when we get busy. Jesus told the story of the parable of the sower and the seeds that were planted. That's supposed to be like the seeds he's planting in our lives. And one of the reasons that the seeds don't grow is because they get choked out by all the other things we're doing. But here's the other thing that busyness does to us, is it spreads us out into so many directions that we have no focus or no purpose or no overarching values in our life that guide us. Jesus said, you're worried and upset about many things. You're being pulled in all kinds of different directions, but really only a few things or one thing are really important. Now, not only did we go to the McMichael Canadian Collection this week, but we topped that off with a trip, because you get hungry at an art gallery, to the Mandarin Buffet. Oh, yes. You all know, don't you? Yes. There is a certain joy to gorging yourself. I used to think that all-you-can-eat buffets were like the best type of meal. Like, where else are you going to get Chinese food, and then some roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, and then weird stuff off the salad bar, some sushi. Aiden had a pickle with syrup on it for dessert. Like, where else can you do that? You can't order a pickle with syrup at a normal restaurant, right? So buffets are amazing. Except that sometimes you ever go to a buffet and you're just like, you feel like you've had like a tiny little spoonful of every food known to humankind. And I'm learning that a better eating experience is actually a well thought out, well prepared meal where the courses build on each other and run together and are matched, and you're kind of headed one direction. You're not having, Chinese and then English, and but everything sort of flows and goes together. And is it possible that too often we do our lives like a buffet, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and we end up pulled in all these different directions and nothing really goes together or makes sense? And we end up just stuffed and not feeling very good. And maybe we should look at our lives more like a good 3 or 4 course meal, where the things that we put in our lives coordinate with each other. They go together. They're leading somewhere. They're not just every direction that we're being called in. What's the solution to becoming less busy? Well, if you ever study graphic design or art, you'll know that one of the essential principles in design is white space. That when designing something, you don't fill every square inch with information or images or whatever, that you have to leave some space that's just sort of dead space. It's the same in a book. You don't have all the words to the very edge of the page. You have margins. It's just how our eyes work. There's space between the lines. And I think that in order to fight this busyness, what we need to do is work white space, work margins into our lives. You are the artist cooperating with God to create this beautiful picture that is your life. And you must include in that picture some spaces where there's nothing going on, where it's just white space. That's how you create a piece of art that's beautiful. Now, what do I mean by white space in life? I mean time to sit and just think and have that cup of coffee. Time to pray and spend time with God where you don't have like, okay, God, I've got 10 minutes. Better say something important. Time to share meals with family and friends where you're not rushing off to the next thing, but you're just together talking about how things are going and sharing. And yeah, I actually mean also some time to just sit and veg and watch TV or read a book or watch a movie or whatever it is that allows you to just turn off and not worry about stuff and just relax. Working into our lives intentional times of doing nothing, accomplishing nothing. Now, this is not just a good idea. This is actually one of the 10 commandments. Don't kill people. Don't steal their stuff. Don't worship gods other than God. Oh, and put in some white space in your life. Let me read it for you in Exodus 20. This is what God says. 10 commandments. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And let me just tell you what Sabbath means. Sabbath was a Hebrew word related to the Hebrew word for stopping, ceasing, not doing anything, white space. Remember the stopping day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a stopping day to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, or your daughter, or your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the stopping day and made it holy, made it different, set it apart, made it something special. This idea of Sabbath is rooted in God's example to us. Now, did God get to the end of 6 days of creating and go, I am just exhausted. You know, spinning up a universe is very hard work. I need a day off. Of course not. God is inexhaustible in his energy and strength. He didn't need to rest. So why did he rest? He did it for us, to set an example and to say, hey, you'll never keep up with me. God would say to us, I can work all the time and never get tired. I can do more than you could even imagine. And in fact, I do. He takes care of the earth all the time, 24/7. He's always there for us. He never goes on vacation. He never takes holidays. He doesn't still take Sabbath days where we can't get in touch with him. He's always working. But he rested on the Sabbath day, the stopping day, to set an example for us to say, listen, don't try to keep up with me. You can't go at the pace that I go at. You need a stopping day. You need some white space in your life. You need some margin. And he commanded it. And it's not just in the 10 Commandments. It's again and again and again and again in the Scriptures. Now, the Jews celebrated it from sundown on Friday until sundown on Saturday. That was the Sabbath day. was 24 hours starting Friday night at sunset. Now, Christians, because the resurrection of Jesus was so significant, changed it to be Sunday, to remember Jesus' resurrection on a Sunday. And for many, many centuries, this idea of taking a day of stopping, of ceasing, was built into society as Christianity kind of became the dominant force in culture. And it really wasn't until the Industrial Revolution happened that you really saw the demise of a Sabbath day, the idea that everyone sort of took Sunday off. Industrial Revolution, suddenly we have machines that can work 24/7 and make our lives easier. And therefore, we need people to work harder to take care of the machines, right? So it's a little ironic, kind of the way that these things have made our lives so much easier, right? You see this demise of the Sabbath, and we're not going back to a societal Sabbath anytime soon. And so that's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for everyone to take Sunday off. I'm not saying that we should do that. But what I am saying is that we have sort of lost sight sometimes of what it means to have a day of just stopping, ceasing, resting, creating white space in our lives. And what I would challenge you today to do, if you are too busy and you find your life just crowded with things, is to practice Sabbath, stopping, ceasing. Now, I'm not talking about not going to work on that day. What do you do on a day off usually? Work, right? Work around your house, do chores, do all the other stuff. That's what we do on our days off. We just keep working, but now we're our own boss. We're self-employed, washing the dishes. We don't pay ourselves very well, but that's all right. The point is, what if you had a day in your week that you didn't have to do anything? Like a little mini vacation. Like, you know, when you're on vacation, you wake up and you're like, I don't have to do anything today. Maybe some of you don't take vacation like that. You should. That's the way to take vacation, not plan every minute. What if you were to have a day like that every week? Where you just said, my to-do lists are out the window. I'm not doing my to-do list today. If there's anything that feels like an obligation to me, that's what I'm not going to do. What am I going to do? Anything that feels like joy. Anything that's life-giving. Anything that fills my soul. And for an entire day, I'm going to ditch the obligations and just be present in those things like what I talked about at first. Now, does it have to be Saturday? Does it have to be Sunday? No. Different day will work for different people. Does it have to be a full 24-hour day? I think you should try as hard as you can. But if you can't start with a 24-hour day, maybe do a 12-hour period. Maybe do a 16-hour period. Work your way up. But what if you had a mini vacation built into every week where you could stop and cease and just be and allow God to be present in your life, to notice that Jesus has been sitting in your living room all week and you just didn't have time. Now, what do you do on a day like that? Well, you ditch your to-do lists. Maybe turn your phone off if that's a problem. One of the bonuses of living in a society that doesn't practice Sabbath is some things are open. So go have fun. Go out to eat. I don't personally see that as sinful. If you see that as a conviction against that, you know, that's between you and God. But for me, we don't live in that society anymore. And so why not order pizza on the Sabbath? Or if you feel like cooking a meal, cook a meal. I often cook on Sundays because I enjoy it. Have some friends over, but here's what you have to be careful of. If you plan that having friends over ahead of time, it becomes an obligation because it's on your calendar now and you have to have them over. And so have friends over spontaneously, not because you're committed to it, because it's what will bring you joy in that moment. And be careful of having friends over because that might lead to cleaning like it does for us. Make sure it's friends that you don't have to clean for. Be careful of your excuse system. You can easily convince yourself that you're doing something because you want to do it when it's actually because it's on the to-do list. Like when I was at my other house where I actually had a lawn to mow, sometimes I enjoyed mowing the lawn. But sometimes I wanted to mow the lawn because the lawn needed to be mowed. Do you understand the difference there? Watch yourself because if you really get serious about Sabbath, you'll start to make excuses and compromises. Now, I would say practice it religiously, but not legalistically. And what I mean by this is practice it as something very important, as an important part of your spiritual life, as a spiritual discipline, but don't do it legalistically where you don't have any flexibility or it's all about the do's and don'ts. Have some clear guidelines and be flexible. For instance, my family signed up for a play, the musical Oliver. Well, when are all the rehearsals? They're on Sunday afternoons. They're kind of an obligation. But it's a period of time that we know is going to come to an end, and so we flexed on that. So be as flexible as you need to, but don't just make excuses. My suggestion to you would be try it for a time. If you don't like it, you can return it and get your money back. Now, the other thing I would say is it's not just about one day in the week. That's not the only white space we should carve out in our lives. I would say it's about spending a little time in Sabbath every day also. I don't mean instead of, I mean also. Have some downtime in the evening. Make some rules about when you're done working around the house. You know what? If it gets to 10 o'clock and I haven't done the dishes yet, let's be honest, it's more like 8:30 for me, then I'm not going to do them. I'll wait till tomorrow. And be okay with that. Build in some white space, some margin in every day. Have some white space and margin in your annual calendar. Have some times where you just take a week off, whether it's a staycation or a vacation, whatever helps you. Now, all of this is about practicing saying no. It's about saying no to these things. It's about accepting the fact that there are too many good things in life to do them all. And so to create the best life, the life that God wants to give me, I actually have to say no to a lot of stuff. Now, what do you do if you are a compulsive yes sayer? Do you know what I mean? In our family, yeah, nice. In our family, there is a bit of a dynamic where April is more of an extrovert, and she is more likely to say yes to many things. And in our family, there's like, have you ever heard of the canary in the coal mine? That it keeps singing until maybe there's a gas leak or something, and it stops singing, and that's when they know they should get out. So in our family, there is a source of messaging that is the first thing that happens when we're getting too busy, and that is me grumbling. So what's the canary in your busyness situation? If you're a compulsive yes sayer, what is it that starts to happen when you've said yes too many times? In our house, it's me going, oh, I just feel so busy. Because I'm more of an introvert, I could stay in more. And so there's that healthy tension, but there's that tension. What is it that you notice in your life? Is it that your prayer life starts to go flat? Is it an eye twitch? That sometimes happens for me if we go past that point. Is it not feeling connected with your kids? Is it anger and frustration that starts coming up? Start noticing that first sign that says you're too busy, and then shut it down. Don't wait a few more weeks of busyness to go way downhill. Shut it down when that canary stops singing, okay? I've been reading Wendell Berry lately. Any Wendell Berry fans here? He's American. Wow, one, yay! American novelist, poet, and I've been reading his novels that are really about nothing. They're about life in a small town. And there's something amazing about the way that he notices the sacredness of everyday life, the sacredness of taking a walk, of spending time with people, the sacredness of living in a place, of building relationships, of relating to a town, of being in nature. He just pulls out the joy and specialness of it. And I think that what becoming unbusy opens up the opportunity for us is to begin to reconnect with the sacredness of everyday life. That connecting with God is not something that happens at church on Sunday, but it's something that happens in every moment of every day, or that it's possible for us. Jesus is sitting in our living room. It's also a profound act of trust in God. To become less busy, to practice Sabbath, is a way of saying to God, I trust you. I trust that even when I cease, when I stop and I'm not working anymore, the world is going to go on. You're going to take care of the things that need to be taken care of. You're going to keep providing for me even while I'm resting. Psalm 127, 1-2 says this, unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise up early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep, there it is, to those he loves. To be unbusy, to practice Sabbath, to create white space in our lives is a way of saying, God, I want you to build my life. And I recognize it's not all on my shoulders. It's a profound act of faith. It's a countercultural stand that we take. And I think it's a gift that God has for each of us. Let's pray. God, I thank you for the gift of life and the sacredness of every moment, the things that fill our lives with joy that often we only notice when we slow down enough to open our eyes. God, you have filled our lives with good things. Help us to notice them more. God, I pray for each person here. They may be struggling with feeling like they could never juggle all the things that they have on their shoulders right now. God, help them sort through the mess and speak to them just kindly and gently and say, hey, you're worried about a lot of things, but there's really only a few things here that are important. God, we don't always have wisdom to know how to sort those things out, and so would you give us wisdom when we need it, and would you provide for our needs, for those who are just working their tails off to scrape a living out. God, I pray you would grant relief. I pray that you would help them to take the step of faith, of creating space in life. And for those of us who just feel in over our heads right now, help us to just move forward making better decisions. And God, I just pray that even this afternoon, you would meet us in our living rooms, in our neighborhoods, as we take walks, as we connect with people. God, meet us in a way that's real and tangible and life-giving. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you next week.